Okay, Danny, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm originally from Norwalk, California, which is a city southeast of Los Angeles. That's where I grew up between the ages of, since I was an infant to the age of 16. And at the age of 16, I was incarcerated and sentenced to 15 years in state prison. Prior to my incarceration, I had a very traumatic life experience at home and in my community. Grew up in a home where domestic violence existed, and that definitely impacted my, my upbringing. Also lived in a community where gang violence existed. By the age of 9, I went to my first funeral for a young man that was killed right there in the neighborhood, who was a friend of our family's. His father was a friend of my father, and so I remember going to the funeral and seeing a dead body, knowing that that's not the life that I want to live, right? That I didn't want to be a cholo, what they would call those young folks that were out there on the streets running around, but as time went on, it became normalized to the point where, I accepted it as part of my reality and ended up being initiated into a street gang in Norwalk, out of Norwalk, One Ways. That's the neighborhood that I'm from. By that happened around the age of 13, and by the age of 16, I got arrested and was sentenced to 15 years in prison.
So you're 15 years old and you're in prison, and how did you end up? So that's your past. How did you end up to where you are now, and where are you now?
So now I am at. I am an associate director for Underground Scholars at the University of California, Berkeley. Underground Scholars is a support program for formerly incarcerated students. So we help people that have been in prison, in jail, juvenile hall, immigration detention centers to get admissions into the University of California. And how I ended up there was through my experience in incarceration. While I was incarcerated, during my time of incarceration, my first 7 years, I was still involved in the same thing that I was involved with that got me into prison. But then it was, halfway through my sentence, I got placed in solitary confinement, and I was labeled an associate to a prison gang. And when you get labeled an associate to a prison gang in California, they would put you in solitary confinement. Excuse me. So I was placed in solitary confinement in 2003, and by 2005, I ended up at Pelican Bay State Prison, the security housing unit, which is a super maximum security prison where you're locked in your cell 22 and a half hours a day. And when I was there, about maybe 70% of the population in Pelican Bay in solitary confinement in the security housing unit was there because of being labeled prison gang member or associates. And so it was a very common thing to label someone a prison gang member or an associate based on very frivolous information, right? First, there was confidential information that they used against me that I wasn't able to challenge. And then they also used a newsletter from the Mexicano Prison Project, which the Mexicano Chicano Prison Project, which is a newsletter based out of San Diego, and they are a prison abolitionist organization that sends their newsletters to people in prison, specifically to Chicanos, right? And they use that as evidence to my prison gang association. They said because the newsletter had a symbol of the Mexican flag is considered a symbol of a prison gang. They also use Aztec and Mayan drawings that my mom would send me in the form of a calendar. My mom used to order these calendars for me with different Aztec and Mayan drawings, and she would send them to me, and the prison would let them in, right? The prison would let them in, and then it was, those calendars that were used against me also, they said that the drawings were had symbols of prison gang association. right? But yet the prison let them in, right? And then they used it against me. And so when I got placed in solitary confinement, once I got to Pelican Bay, because I was in solitary confinement for 2003, but I didn't get to Pelican Bay until 2 years after, in 2005. And it was when I got to Pelican Bay that my educational journey started, right? I've always loved learning. I've always loved studying, especially Mexican history, right? I used to love studying the Mexican Revolution. That was like one of my favorite topics. And you know, but once I got to Pelican Bay, it became more of an institutional education. Like I was educating myself, you know, getting books and ordering books that I would read myself. But it wasn't until I got to Pelican Bay that I was encouraged by people around me to pursue my GED and also college courses that were being offered inside the prison, right? There was a correspondence program through Coastline Community College and also through Feather River College. They were offering a correspondence courses that you can get an AA degree in, right? And the AA degree was, I think it was liberal studies, right? And then they also offered certificate of accomplishment in general business. And so once I got my GED, I started doing the certificate of accomplishment in general business. And I was, you know, by that time I was about 2.5 years to the house when I started college. And then what happened was I told myself I'm just going to do one class per semester because I only had about 5 semesters left, right? 2.5 years. And I said, all right, I'm going to do the certificate of accomplishment in general business, and I'm just going to do one class per semester. It won't be too much on me because I was very insecure. I didn't think that I would be able to do college courses, right? I just thought that it was something that was unreachable, right? And what happened was I ended up getting moved while in solitary confinement to another building, right? And there was an individual there. His name is Rene Munoz, who was a lifer, and he ended up becoming, you know, my academic advisor, my tutor, my mentor, you know, all of those things that you find at a university or at a college, you know, that human resource, right? That helps you, that teaches you how to navigate the system and how to excel. And so when I got moved and got placed next to him, you know, and I told him that I was taking a college, I told him what my academic plan was I'm going to take one class per semester until I graduate or until I go home. And he was like, nah, fuck that. We're going to get your AA, or we're going to do as many classes as we can to get you prepared for your AA. And I was trying to come up with all these excuses like, oh, my mom doesn't have money for books because I got all the books here. You ain't got to worry about that, you know. And so he ended up convincing me. And I just started taking a bunch of college courses, taking college courses. You know, I did a lot of courses in philosophy. I did a course in communication. I remember doing one in sociology and psychology. And I think a combination of all those classes, you know, and along with the stuff that I was already reading, I was into a lot of radical literature, like anti-capitalist literature, you know. And a combination of that really inspired me to be a little bit more critical about society. And, you know, I stopped looking at my experience as an individual experience that I was meant to be in prison because that's just what God wanted, right? Or that's what God wrote down for me, right? And so, you know, during, you know, so I said, you know what, I'm going to go and, you know, do as much as I can while I'm here, you know, in prison until I get to my AA. And so then it wasn't until, you know, I came home, you know, I didn't finish my AA, but that was a good thing, right? That was a good thing that I didn't finish my AA because it motivated me to want to finish my AA once I came home, you know, and I came home and I told myself, and I was also setting like a very low bar for myself, with like, not to say that the AA is a low bar, right? if that's what people want to do, that's great. You know what I mean? Especially if it meets their career objectives, right? But for me, it was like, all right, I want to finish my AA and then get a job, you know, and you know, maybe like in a nonprofit, working with formerly incarcerated people or with young people that are at the margins of being pushed into the school to prison pipeline. And so that was my plan. I came home. 2-3 days later, I'm at community college and Cerritos College, right there, like down the street from my mom's house. I'm applying to get admitted into the school, but I end up enrolling late for the spring semester. I was released January 19, 2010, and the deadline had just passed, right? But I still applied and I got admitted for the fall semester and the summer. I started taking classes in the summer, even though I didn't have to. And so between the time that I got out and the time that I started my first class, I would always go to the campus, like just to do drop-in counseling, like, you know, or talk to a counselor, right? They got these drop-in counseling hours between certain days of the week. You could go there and just drop in for 15 minutes with the counselor and have a quick conversation about what your academic plan are. I didn't really have an academic plan. I was just trying to figure that shit out. And in one of those moments that I go to campus, you know, I'm walking into the counseling building, right? And walking out is one of my homeboys from my barrio, and he doesn't recognize me, right? I've changed, right? I'm 32 years old now, 30 years old. I've been in prison 15 years, so he hasn't seen me in a long time. But I remember him because he still looks the same, you know. And I remember him. But when I first seen him, I was like, man, is that a homeboy? And he walked right past me. I'm like, man, that's homeboy. I know that's the homie Crafty. And I turned around and I called him out, Crafty. And he turns around and he had this mean ass mug, like Manuel Candelario. He goes, yeah, what's up? He goes, who are you? He goes, me, Danny, homie Turtle. That's what they would call me on the streets, right? And I said, Carla's brother, Gordo's brother. He was best friends. He was a good friend with my brother who had passed away. And oh, what's up, man? I heard you got out and shit, you know? Because what are you doing here? Well, I just enrolled, man, and I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. You know, I was taking classes when I was in Pelican Bay, and I want to finish my AA. You know, what about you? What are you doing here? Because I just finished my AA. I'm transferring to UC Irvine. I'm transferring to UC Irvine. I'm going to do pre-med. I want to be a brain surgeon. And when he told me that, I remembered him from our childhood experience. You know, we called him Crafty. He was a very crafty person. Like, he knew how to work with his hands. He was very intelligent. And remember when we were kids, he used to be able to steal a car in less than 60 seconds. Like, he'll break in and he'll have it running hot wired in less than 60 seconds. And when he told me that he wanted to be a brain surgeon, I thought about those moments when he used to steal cars. And I was telling myself, like, well, shit, brain surgery, to a certain extent, you're wiring people's brains. I'm sure it's much more complicated than that, but that was like my first initial thought. So when he told me that, I was like, hey, I could see you as a brain surgeon. You were very technical when we were kids, you know, with your hands and shit. You were, you know. Yeah. Anyways, he ended up being a veterinarian. His dad was a gallero. His dad used to raise roosters. And so when he told me that, you know, when I found out that he ended up being a veterinarian, it pretty much made sense, you know.
He was also formerly incarcerated.
Yeah, he did about he spent some time in California Youth Authority, and then he also spent some time in prison. And so yes, he was formerly incarcerated. Anyways, in that conversation, we had about like a 30-minute conversation. And in that conversation, he pretty much broke it down to me, and he told me, look, Danny, if you want to get your AA and that's all you want, that's cool. But like, here's another plan. Here's something else that you can do. And here's how I did it. Here's how I was able to get transferred, how I was able to get admitted to UC Irvine. And he pretty much just shared his blueprint with me, you know, of how he did it. And the most important thing that he told me was that the community college is your community. There are people here that want to see you excel. It's not like high school, it's not like middle school. where the teachers are intentionally trying to get you in trouble. Right? There's people here that want to see you excel. They want to see you succeed. They want to help you in achieving your academic goals, right? And your career goals. And so that really left, it left an impression on me. And then he started telling me about all these different programs, EOPS, the Math Center, the Writing Center, the Honor Scholars Program, Puente, and so, told me about all the programs that are on campus that are there to help, these programs that are there to help students like me, right? Students that, that are first generation in higher education, that are, students of color, right? I identified as Chicano, and so I joined some of these programs that he talked about, right? Especially Puente. Puente was very impactful in helping me demystify the transfer process to the University of California. The Puente program was started in 1982 in Chabot Community College in the Bay Area, and it was started as a program to help Chicanos get admitted into the University of California. And so, being in Puente, being in the student organizations, being in the Honor Scholars Program, the Writing Center, the Math Center, I really developed a community there in community college that was instrumental in helping me transfer, but really Puente, right? Puente, put me on a path where I was going to universities like UCLA and UC Riverside, and I was attending different student programs that were, community college programs for students that wanted to transfer, and going to like UC Riverside and UCLA and meeting people there, especially, people of color, Chicanos, and telling them like, look, man, I'm formerly incarcerated. I spent 14 years in prison. Is that something that's going to be held against me? And like, nah.
So you were always straight up about that.
Yeah, I was always straight up about that. Like, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be something that was going to be used against me, right? And so.
Yeah, like you get in and all of a sudden.
Like, oh yeah, you're formerly incarcerated. You can't be here. And no, there are people who were telling me like, nah, use that in your favor. Use that when you apply. You're going to have to write a personal statement, and in that personal statement, talk about how your incarceration, use that as a source of empowerment. That it was because of that incarceration. Now you want to go to higher education to help other people avoid prison altogether, or for those that are coming out of prison to be able to continue their education. And so, I got admitted to the UC Berkeley, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, UC San Diego, and UC
So you
Riverside.
Were like an honor student in community college?
I wasn't an honor student, but I did have a good GPA, good enough to get admitted to those 5 universities, right? I wish I was an honor student, then I would have had like a full ride at the UC, but for the most part, it was pretty inexpensive for me. People think that the UCs are expensive, and they are if you are still a beneficiary of your parents. But if you are independent of your parents and not being...
How do you prove you're not dependent on your parents?
Their taxes. If they're not filing taxes and claiming you on their taxes, then that means that you're independent. If they are,
even if you're an adult, they can...
Yeah, up to you're 25. They can claim you.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I didn't know that either. But yeah. So, so then I got admitted to UC Berkeley, and that's the whole. That just changed my whole life.
Okay, so you're at UC Berkeley. Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us about the transformation.
So I transferred to UC Berkeley in the fall of 2012. I remember I moved up to Berkeley about 2 weeks before classes started. Yeah, I moved to Berkeley about 2 weeks before classes started, and the reason I did that was because I wanted to map out the campus the same way that I did it in community college, where I found all the resources and where I found my people. Pretty much. I wanted to see who's who and where they're at, who's gonna support me, And I did that. I would be on campus walking around, going to ethnic studies program, Chicano studies, going to all these different centers on campus and just asking questions, And it was the first day of school that I met a gentleman named Steven Sifra. And turns out, the first day that I met him, within 5 minutes of meeting each other, we both discovered that we had both been in solitary confinement at the security housing unit in Pelican Bay State Prison.
Yeah.
And talking to him, my mind starts racing. I'm like, oh shit, well, if you're here and I'm here, who else is here?
Yeah.
That's formerly incarcerated, right?
Yeah.
And then sure enough, I ended up meeting two professors, Patricia Hilden and Victoria Robinson, and they were in the ethnic studies department. And I met them through my ethnic studies advisor, or Chicano studies advisor, because I first transferred in as Chicano studies, and then I switched over to ethnic studies. They're in the same department. I just like the fact that ethnic studies was a lot more broad and included a diverse group of people, as opposed to Chicano studies just focused really on Chicanos, right?
Yeah.
And I'm already Chicano, so I kind of know that already. So I want to learn more about other people's experiences. But anyways, my advisor, Laura Jimenez, introduced me to these two professors who were doing, they were interested in studying prisons and stuff like that, right? And so when I got introduced to them, they were already having conversations about trying to start or create a space for formerly incarcerated people.
Yeah.
Right? And basically what they were just trying to do, and not just saying that was all they were trying to do, is the least that they had, that we could have done was we were trying to create a space in the Transfer Reentry Students Parent Center, which is a space for non-traditional students, right, that are either 25 years and older, that are student parents, student veterans, and the students that just come with different identities, right? Undocumented students were also part of that. And so we were trying to create a space there. We were asking the director, yo, can we get a table? We just want a table that's specifically for formerly incarcerated people. At least that's the conversation that they were having.
Oh, you wanted a table, okay.
Right, that was the conversation that they were having with the director of the Transfer Reentry Student Parent Center.
Yeah, the first thing is space.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing was that they didn't have any formerly incarcerated students. Yeah. But that's the conversation that they were having. And so when they met me and they found out that I was formerly incarcerated, they asked me yo, would you like to be part of the work that we're doing? We're trying to create a space for formerly incarcerated students. And I'm yeah, I'm on board. Definitely. Put me, I want to be part of that. And so that's when I told them also well, look, there's also someone else here that's formerly incarcerated, and that was Steven Sifra. And so we started having these conversations, and one thing leads to another, and those two professors had applied for a grant to create a class called the prison class, which was a class that was going to focus specifically on prison, and it was going to be taught by 4 professors: a professor of law, a professor of history, a professor of architecture, and a professor in ethnic studies.
Yeah.
But before we started that class, bunch of people, right? Some of them were formerly incarcerated. Some of them identified as system impacted, being they had a parent, a brother, or a loved one that was incarcerated. And so we created this reading group, and throughout the semester, in the spring of 2013, we would meet once a week, and each person would facilitate that session for that week, right? Each person was assigned a week, right? Like, and they would make the reading suggestions, right? Like, so, like for instance, I was assigned, week 13 or whatever, right? And I said, okay, we're gonna read about solitary confinement, and so before class, supposedly we'd have to read our literature, and then we'll come to class and have a discussion about it, right? But throughout the semester, as we're meeting every week, and discussing and having the discussions about prison and about the prison experience and the re-entry experience, we start, asking, questions about what else can we do besides meet once a week and to discuss about prison. And so then we started having meetings outside of class, and we started organizing the formerly incarcerated students and the system impacted students, and along with the professor, right, trying to figure out a way that we can create a space beyond that table. Like we started thinking about we want to create a center. We want to create a research center. We want to create a program to support formerly incarcerated students. We want to do this, we want to do that. And every week that we would meet would have all these different ideas, but really no way of seeing that through because we didn't have no funding.
Yeah.
Right? And then two students that were part of our group, Wendy Pacheco and Valerie Jameson. Wendy Pacheco was the student senator for the Raza community.
Okay.
And Valerie Jameson was the vice president of internal affairs for the student body. Okay. So both of these students were part of the student associated student body, right? Like they got voted in, and it turns out that the associated student body at UC Berkeley, they manage this big ass fund, like a big fund of money that comes out of student fees, right? And so they found out that student clubs can apply for this money, that there's a grant called the CACSIF grant. I forgot exactly what the acronym stands for. I can find out later for you. But the CACSIF grant was a grant of $135,000 to start an initiative. But in order to do that, you have to be an official student group or student organization recognized by Associated Student Government. Okay. And so the first thing that we did, we created a student club, right? And we discussed the name. It took a long time to find the name, but we ended up going with Underground Scholars Initiative. Okay. Right? And once we founded the club and we assigned our student representatives, we applied for that grant. We got that grant, which was $135,000, and it was I think 2 or 3 years funding.
Okay.
And we used that money to rent an office space at Stiles Hall. Stiles Hall is a nonprofit that has been collaborating with UC Berkeley for over 100 years. And their mission has changed over time. Now their mission is to recruit Black, Latinx, and Native American students into the UC system, whether from high school or community college. And so we talked to the executive director at that time was Dave Starks, and we asked him like, yo, can you rent us some office space here so that we can have a space for underground scholars? And he was on board. Like Dave Starks has been supportive of underground scholars from the gate. And so we ended up, starting our office space there at Stiles Hall. We hired a couple students to work in the office. We bought computers, we bought some sofas, printers, a microwave, a refrigerator, and really created a little space for ourselves within Styles Hall. And we've been there since 2014. Yeah, and we're still at Styles Hall.
Okay, so you start Underground Scholars, and it becomes a successful program. Let's fast forward a little bit. How do you end up here in Mexico, and how did this binational movement start?
I guess it happened through the pandemic, you know? I think the pandemic brought the global community together in a way, right? Because everything went on Zoom,
Yeah.
right? And so two individuals who are part of Underground Scholars, which was Ryan Flaco Rising, who was at that time during the pandemic had just started his undergrad at the University of California, Santa Barbara, with my little brother, with my brother, Gilbert Murillo. They have both started UC Santa Barbara the same year and became the co-founders of Underground Scholars at UC Santa Barbara. And it was during the pandemic that Flaco and my brother, really Flaco, I believe, right? They started doing these political education courses on Zoom, right? And that's how I believe he met you. You know, and then Flaco knows that I travel a lot to Mexico, especially Guadalajara, because I got a lot of family here in Guadalajara, and you know, and you're here in Guadalajara, and then that's when he introduced us, which was, you know, sometime in 2020, 2021, you know, and you know, just to conversations with you, you know, and the work that you were doing or the work that you envision, you know, I kind of, you know, got involved like that, you know, really through Flaco and the pandemic and Zoom and these political education classes, you know, I ended up meeting you, and you know, and then you kind of brought me along to be part of this work, right? And for me, you know, this work is personal, right? I'm formerly incarcerated, but I also have a brother. My little brother is also formerly incarcerated, but I have an older brother who's formerly incarcerated, but originally born in Tijuana, and he had been deported on multiple occasions. He would come back, you know, he'll get deported and he'll come back. And it's when in 2001, that was the last time he was deported, and he ended up getting killed in Tijuana 2 or 3 days later after his deportation. And so for me, you know, once I met you, you know, I really thought about my brother, you know, and that experience, right? And not wanting other people to have that experience, you know. You know, my mother, she suffered a lot because of that. And so for me, you know, wanting to create some type of support system for folks that are being deported, right? And if we could do it through education, even better, you know. I'm all about education. I believe education is, you know, if done correctly, it is a tool and a source of empowerment and transformation for those of us that have been marginalized, you know. And so I wanted to, you know, create a pathway for folks that are going to be deported to be able to, you know, get admitted into universities over here in Mexico, you know. And so that's kind of where, you know, where we're at right now, you know, trying to establish that pathway for people that are going to be deported, and hopefully, you know, we can figure out a way to get them into the universities, especially now that the Pell Grants are coming back, or they're already back. People that are in prison have access to Pell Grant, right? And so that means that people that are going to be deported have access to Pell Grant until they're deported. And so if we're going to be talking about racial justice in prison and racial justice for formerly incarcerated people, then what does that mean for people that are going to be deported, right? Does that racial justice end at the border, right? Are these students no longer are concerned, right? I know that the universities that are teaching people in prison, they can't do everything for them when they come home, but we can work together, right? Universities in the U.S., universities in Mexico, to figure out a way to support this population of people, right? And I think for me, it becomes a public safety issue, right? The more educated the public, I think the less likely that people are going to get involved in crime, right?
So, I mean, we've been doing this work actually for years now, right? Maybe a couple of years we've been going at this, maybe even a little bit longer, but what do you see? I mean, from what you've seen in Mexico, what needs to be done in Mexico? What can we as activists, academics, people involved in administration and universities do here, and what should be done in the United States? Where does like this binational link lay?
Right, no, that's a good question, and I think I'll answer for Mexico first because I don't really have that answer, right? I think that's really more for people that are on the ground doing the work here, right, to answer that question, right? Because I don't want to come in here and like, oh look, I've come from the United States, I have all the answers, which I don't, right? And I believe that people that are on the ground here in Mexico should be the ones leading that work, and us in the U.S. should be supporting them to lead that work, right? But I would say this about Mexico: there needs to be a cognitive, a mental shift, right, in society, and especially in academia, right? That says, because based on my conversation with people that have been deported, people that are formerly incarcerated in Mexico, just the same way as in the U.S., but it's something that's changing over there. There's a stigma to that. Being formerly incarcerated, being deported, especially with being deported, right? Like you were in the land of milk and honey, and you fucked that up, and now you're back over here. And so they look down on you. And I think we have to change that mindset, right? That people that are deported, they're still human beings. They're still they still deserve their dignity and their respect, right, as human beings. And so there has to be that shift, right, in society, but especially in academia, right? In academia, I feel that it's even much more, that stigma is a lot more harsher, right? Like academics in Mexico, they want to study this population, but they don't want this population to be the ones doing the studies.
Exactly.
Right? And I think we need to change that mindset, right? And I think one way to change that mindset is that, highlighting the work that's been done, whether it's in the U.S. or the work that's being done here. Even though that work is very limited, it does exist. There are people that are doing prison education here. There are people that have been in prison and have gone to the universities, but those people are very far and few, right?
Disconnected.
And they're disconnected. There's no connection, there's no network, right? So we really, build this network of people that have been in prison and have gone into higher education in Mexico. And it's these people, and maybe it's a big ask for them, right? Maybe they're like, nah, I've already, that's not who I am anymore. And I don't want to be identified as that no more. And I get that, but I think those people their testimonies are powerful. And I think is having to use using those testimonies, you can change hearts and minds. So I think that's in Mexico. Like it's changing hearts and minds through the testimonies of people that lived it, that had either been deported and went into higher education, or that were incarcerated in Mexico and went into higher education. Those people are the cultural shift changers, right? If they use their narrative for the right reasons, right? But I also get it that some people want to distance themselves from that experience. Now, in the U.S., what we can do over there is, academics in the U.S. or even university college administrators that are running prison education programs, start talking to their colleagues over here, right? Their counterparts, like, whether it's the chancellor of the University of California having a conversation with, I guess over here is like the rectoria, right? Of the UDG. Like, look, this is what we're doing in California. This is what we're doing at the University of California. At the University of California, Irvine, we have a prison education program that is not just offering a BA to people in prison, but we're also supporting them to continue their education once they are released. You know what I mean? And they're being admitted into the university, right? And they have a space at the university through underground scholars, right? So for us is how do we, use our power in the U.S. to also convince administrators and academics in Mexico, like, yo, this is something that you can do, and it's something that not only that you can do it, but it's also going to benefit Mexico on a larger scale. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, it is a public safety issue, right? People that are being deported, if they don't have no source of income, their options are limited. And those limitations can only take you so far, right? And, there's not a lot of opportunities for them here other than maybe the call centers and maybe some kind of low service sector job or cartel work.
Okay. So what do you imagine, like, what are the steps you see in like future objectives that we have binationally?
I think one is getting institutional buy-in in Mexico.
Yeah.
Where the universities are saying like, okay, we're going to create a space for formerly incarcerated Mexicans or formerly incarcerated people that were deported back to Mexico, right? Getting that institutional buy-in, right? Now, as far as the U.S. side, what we can do over there is start figuring out who's going to be deported that is currently pursuing higher education while incarcerated. And is higher education something that they want to pursue once they come home or once they're deported?
Yeah.
Right? And so if that's the case, then, we can start building these networks between universities and universities like, hey, we have this student that's going to be deported and he's going to go back to Mexico and he wants to continue his education. So once they're deported, we connect them with our counterparts over here so that they can support them in that transition into higher education. But also not just the transition into higher education, but I think we also need support in helping people transition into Mexican society in general, right? Like we need to help them get their documento, their CUR, their INE, and all these other documents that a Mexican citizen needs to be a Mexican citizen, right? Because you could be a Mexican citizen without no documents, so technically you don't exist.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there's a lot of people that get deported, but they don't exist because they have no documents. And some of these people, they're being deported at 40, 45 years old, but they ain't been here since they were like 1 year old.
Yeah.
So they don't know nothing about Mexico. They don't know nothing about how to get their documents. So we also need to create that network where we get people their documents, right? And we could do it even before they get deported, because we already do it in California. People that are going to be released from a California prison back into a California city, they're getting their documents before they're being released. So why can't we do that for those that are being deported to Mexico? We can work with the Consulado Mexicano to make that process happen.
Yeah, like that was something that Ricardo was saying. He said, why do I have to start this process here, the revalidation? There's all this paperwork in Mexico. Why can't he do that in prison? I mean, why is it so hard?
And I think that's a conversation we need to have with the Consulado. You know what I mean? A conversation that we need to have with the Consulado. I've heard that it was done before. I don't know in what California prison, but I heard there was a California prison where the consulado would go in there and would help people straighten out their documents. So I guess, figuring out what consulate was doing that so that we could try to reestablish that type of program.
And one major problem I think in Mexico is programs usually only last for several years because politicians change. How could we create durable programs? I think that's something that we need to think about. I mean, on this side, how can we create durable programs?
That's a good question, and I don't know how to answer that because I really don't know the Mexican system, right?
Yeah.
But one thing that we've done is institutionalize programs and also codify them through law, right? Like the Pell Grant. Pell Grant is a law. Of course, it can change when a politician said like, "Nah, we're done with doing this."
But it's more difficult to change. It's more permanent. Okay. All right. So basically, you've referred to law. You've referred to changing the narrative. There's going to need to be a lot of cooperation. I have this one question for you, and we'll finish with this. So you're from Los Angeles, from Norwalk. So you're from this urban Chicano lifestyle. Do you see yourself? What does that actually mean? All right, so you grew up in Los Angeles and in Norwalk, and you live kind of this urban Chicano lifestyle. Did you consider yourself a homie, and what does that mean?
I think over time, my definition of homie has changed, right? I was a homie on the streets from out of Norwalk, and those that were from out of Norwalk, those were my homies. Everybody else, fuck them, and then in prison, right, there's different factions, right? There's Southern Chicanos, Northern Chicanos, and me being from Southern California, those were all my homies. Anybody that identified as a Southsider or a Sureño, those were my homies, right? And then even in prison, my concept of homie started changing, and I started seeing homie more as a community of people who have similar experiences, right? Whether you're norteño or sureño, and that, when I was in solitary confinement, I kind of started questioning, the things that I was doing, right? Like, the gang activity stuff, right? And questioning, through I don't know if it's like a Marxist framework or lens, but it was through like this anti-capitalist lens, right? That I started seeing the things that I was doing in my neighborhood as a micro-capitalist, like I was selling drugs in my barrio, I was robbing other people that were selling drugs in my barrio because I want to be the main competition, and that's kind of what we do around the world. You know what I mean? Like as a country, like as a government, the U.S. is an imperial nation, right? And we go and we're a gangster nation, right? We go and we fucking go to different countries and we take their resources and make it ours and take for our advantage, right? But it doesn't really benefit the people at the bottom in the U.S. But that's kind of like I started thinking of like the things that I was doing in my neighborhood was on a micro scale, similar to what we do on a macro scale as a U.S. government. Yeah. And so that really shifted my mind, right, and started thinking more as, seeing my struggles and the struggles of norteños, blacks, Crips, Bloods as one struggle, right? I mean, but we have been divided and conquered, right? And we have been placed in this bucket where we're just a bunch of crabs fighting for the scraps that are at the bottom, you know? And so for me, when I came home, I knew that I didn't want to be part of that anymore. I knew that I wanted to be part of something else, something that was going to be, I wasn't thinking about changing systems and all that, right? But at least definitely changing my lifestyle and hoping that that would impact my little brother and my nephew to also change. Because when I came home, they were also following in my footsteps and were going in the same direction that I was going in before being incarcerated. And once I got into college, in community college, it was more just about like me just trying to navigate the college and trying to succeed on an individual level, right? But at the same time, when I was in community college in 2011, the homies in Pelican Bay State Prison organized a hunger strike, 2 hunger strikes, to end long-term solitary confinement.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing about that movement was it was a movement that included everybody that was in solitary confinement. Sureños, norteños, whites, and blacks.
It was a Marxist revolution.
And we came together. People in prison realized that we had a lot more in common than what separated us.
And that's something I think that's really important to our listeners who are not in the United States, that the way prisons are divided along racial lines is very much how people are divided throughout American society, in cities like the redlining, in universities and high schools where people tend to gravitate towards what they consider their race. So just for our...
But there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But there's nothing wrong with that only if and when you're working against each other.
Okay.
Then that's when I'm opposed to it. There's nothing wrong with like me saying, I'm Chicano and I'm gonna help my Chicano gente.
Yeah.
But not at the expense of black people.
Yeah.
Like now, we need to see each other as having a common struggle.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Alright, so you were saying?
So the hunger strike, I was a student in community college when the hunger strike happened, right?
Okay.
And I was communicating with a lot of people in Pelican Bay Shoe, where the hunger strike originated. And for me, it was like, it was a very moving and empowering moment, because that was something that I had, envisioned in the shoe. Like, man, why can't we come together?
Yeah.
But I knew that I didn't have that power to bring us together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so when it happened, I was like, fuck, that's fucking dope. How can I get involved with this?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I went to UC Berkeley that we started organizing for the third and final hunger strike that actually brought an end to long-term solitary confinement. And what we mean by long-term solitary confinement, we're talking about people that were in the shoe for 10, 20, 30 years in solitary confinement. I mean, I was in there in solitary confinement of total about 7 years. And that's a lot of time. But in comparison to a lot of these other individuals, fuck, they ain't seen their mom in 20 years.
You don't get to see
you could, but sometimes people don't have the money to go all the way up there.
Yeah, it's out of...
And you only get a visit for like an hour. Yeah. So sometimes not even worth having your mom travel 1,000 miles just to see you for an hour, And so when I got to Pelican Bay, and I told you about Steven Cifra, who was the first one of the...
you guys protesting?
Yeah, both of us. We both got involved in the movement. We started doing interviews with like Univision, NBC, Oprah Winfrey. We're doing all kinds of interviews about the hunger strike movement, while simultaneously trying to organize a space on campus for formerly incarcerated students. So really the hunger strike gave us a larger platform to be able to do that. right? Through the hunger strike and all of the social media attention that we were getting, that really gave us a platform to really advocate at the university for a space for formerly incarcerated people. And so, it was through that work that, we were able to establish Underground Scholars and we're able to expand to all of the UCs. Now we exist at all 9 undergraduate University of California campuses, right? There's an Underground Scholars program there supporting formerly incarcerated students.
So, from what I understand, it's like your conception of a homie has expanded from your neighborhood and then to Southern California with the different factions in prison, and then it expands even greater once you get into university. But who belongs to that community now? So what does that mean to be a homie? I mean, I know it's expanded, but what does membership mean?
Well, we don't jump you in. To me, is if you're at the university, and whether you're formerly incarcerated or not, but you come from that experience. I got a bunch of homies that never been to prison, but they've been shot at, they've been pulled over multiple times, and have grew up in that lifestyle. But yet some of them might be at the university. To me, that's a homie. You know what I mean? But for me, a homie is someone who comes from that lifestyle, whether you're Chicano from Southern California, Chicano from Northern California, whether you're a Blood, a Crip, from the Bay Area. If you're in higher education and you're trying to not just change your life, but the life and the outcome of your community, to me, that's a homie. And there's someone that I know who uses this acronym for homie, which means helping others move in excellence. And I think that's what a homie is. A homie is someone that's helping other people reach their goals, right?
So I think that's a really good definition, because the homies, when you think about in neighborhoods, they've been criminalized, but really they're in savage competition, right, with each other, and they group together and they do help each other. And their conception of excellence may be different than others, but I mean, like you said, they're trying to excel in capitalism within their own context. And we're still helping each other in a much broader concept and perhaps with more consciousness. I appreciate you giving that definition to us. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our listeners?
I hope that through the work that we're doing, right, that we are able to change those hearts and minds in Mexico, and particularly in Mexican institutions of higher learning, to be able to create a pathway for people that are in prison in Mexico or that are being deported and want to pursue their education. Because I truly believe that education is empowering, not just for the individual that is being educated, but for their families and their communities, right? And an example that I always use is my brother and my nephew, right? As I said, right, when I came home from prison, my little brother and my nephew, they were expecting me to come home with that same mindset. And they thought that I was going to go back to those things that I was doing before I got incarcerated. And they told me, like, "Yo, we want to follow in your footsteps. We want to go.
Footsteps.
We want to go to Pelican Bay Shoe. We want to be a gangster like you." And so, I changed my footprint. I changed my footsteps in the path that I started taking, right? And it took me a while to bring them along because they were young, right? And for me, it's a lot harder to work with young people than it is to work with people that are a little older.
They were teenagers.
Yeah, they were teenagers.
They were in it.
They were 16, 15,
Oh, yeah.
By the time I went to the university and they were like 18 and 19, like they was gang banging, like actively gang banging and, doing that gang banging, what gang banging entails, right? And so when I went to Berkeley, I moved in with me. right? And they, even while they were at
Oh,
Berkeley,
wow. So you took them out of the hood all the way to
Berkeley,
Wow.
right? I moved them with me, but they would go back to the neighborhood, and they would fucking go over there and fucking get into bullshit, and then go back, and then they'll go back to the
They were
neighborhood.
going to high school. And
No, they were already done with high school. They were already over 18. They were already over 18, but they would go back to the neighborhood and fucking, go over there and cause trouble or whatever, and then go back. At one point, my nephew ended up in prison. My brother got arrested for possession of a gun, and my brother, he's the one that ended up. He got arrested for possession of a gun, and while he was fighting his case, we bailed him out, right? But my mom told him, I'm only gonna bail you out under the condition that you move up to Berkeley permanently. Like, you're not gonna come down there for nothing other than for your court, right? If you don't do that, then I'm gonna fucking remove the bail. You know what I mean? And he said, all right, cool. So he moved up there with me, and it was, I told him, like, look, you're fighting a case, you're looking at 5 years with this gun case. I can get you letters of recommendation.
well, prove to me you're worth it, right?
What?
So, but he had to prove himself for those letters. Right?
Yeah, so I told him, man, if you want these letters, I can get you some letters of recommendation from professors. And they've agreed that to get you these letters. Two professors, right? The ones that I mentioned, right? Professor Patricia Hilton and Professor Victoria Robinson. But under the condition that you go to class with me. You know what I mean? So he would, tag along with me to class. I'd have him take notes and stuff.
Okay.
And so they wrote him a letter to the judge, right? I wrote him a letter, and then a homie who was a norteño, he was a community organizer. He wrote a letter for my brother.
Okay.
So he went back to he worked at a nonprofit in San Francisco called Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. And so we wrote these 4 letters for my brother, and his case was pretty much went from 5 years in prison to 1 year in the county jail, and he ended up serving like less than 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah, and so when he was released, the judge also put a condition on him, was that you're gonna move to Berkeley and live with your brother, and every other month you're gonna come down to check in with your probation officer.
Okay.
So he would live over there with me, and he would, come down. And it was around the time that I was about to graduate, and I ended up getting a fellowship, to go to New York. I went to New York, and I worked at the Vera Institute of Justice and at Rutgers University. But I couldn't take my brother with me. So I told my little brother, like, hey, bro, you gotta get it together now. Like, I'm about to leave. You know what I mean? Like, what you gonna do? And so what he ended up doing in my last semester, in my last semester at Berkeley, he went to adult school, got his high school diploma, and then he got into community college at Berkeley City College, and he started getting financial aid. And through that financial aid, he was able to get himself a little apartment. And before I moved out, he had a place to live. So he wasn't homeless, right? But for like maybe his first year in community college, he wasn't really focused. He was just going and just bullshitting around. But then somehow something snapped in him, and he got it together, and he ended up transferring to UC Santa Barbara, and ended up graduating with a double major in sociology and political science from the University of California, Santa Barbara. My nephew as well. My nephew ended up going to prison, and he got released like in 2017 or 2016. Yeah, I think 2016, 2017, he got released. And in the summer of, I think, 2017. Yeah, summer 2017, he had got released. And a very good friend of ours had just gotten killed. In the summer,
Yeah, people die.
that's when it's real active gang banging and stuff, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's real active out there in the streets, And so, especially in LA, right? Like, it gets hot weather-wise, but it also gets hot gang banging-wise, And I told him, like, bro, like, I was scared for him, bro. Like, I was scared. I thought he was gonna end up getting killed or end up in prison, for a murder or something, you know, and move up to Whitney, man. Give it a shot. Give it a shot. You know what I mean? I'll fucking get you a job up there because he likes cooking. He loves to cook. I have a homie that has a restaurant. He'll give you a job. And I moved him up there with me. And sure enough, my homeboy hired him. Well, he was not really my homeboy, just someone that I knew. You know, hired him. And he, like my nephew, he excelled in that kitchen, man. Like, homeboy was happy with him. He's like, bro, he's a hard worker. He knows how to work the kitchen. And like, what did he learn? Like, you know, like in prison, he worked the kitchen, you know?
Yeah.
But he also had been cooking since he was about 8 years old.
Okay.
When my mom caught him smoking weed and told him that if he continued to smoke weed, she won't cook for him no more. So he learned how to cook for himself.
Oh, wow.
You know, and still smoke weed, right? And what after that, he likes to work. He likes money, but he's also in community college right now in culinary arts, and he's about to transfer. He's close to transferring to either a Cal State or a UC, right? But he wants to continue the study.
Is culinary arts as a bachelor's degree?
No, but if he goes to the UCs, he said he'll study nutritional science.
Okay. So the AA is a culinary arts
Yeah,
degree.
he's doing the culinary arts degree right now.
Okay.
It's an associate of science in culinary arts. And if he transfers to the UC, he'll probably study nutritional science, or he can go to the Cal State and study business and hospitality and restaurant management.
Okay.
Which is kind of like a lot of community colleges have like agreements with Cal States for their culinary arts program to transfer into that program. And it's, you know, learning how to run a business like a restaurant or a hotel stuff, you know?
One thing, so we've talked about a lot of really important elements of education with the formerly incarcerated. You mentioned, what you just mentioned right now is creating a new pathway where you can achieve excellence, which is beneficial to everybody, beneficial to the homies themselves, beneficial to societies. There's one other thing we haven't really mentioned, which I think is important, is bringing these people into spaces where their imagination could contribute to innovative ideas where traditional intellectuals may not be able to fathom because they're constricted by their own context, you know? So a lot of these things, like what happened with the underground scholars, it's very grassroots. And it's been imagined by people who have directly impacted the system. So could you tell me a little bit about the importance of having these people in the communities, not just to benefit ourselves for public safety, but to innovate?
Repeat that again?
Okay, so could you talk a little bit about the importance of having formerly incarcerated in university, not only as a public safety measure, but also as a means to innovate?
Right.
Yeah.
I think being formally incarcerated in higher education is kind of something new.
Yeah.
Right. Even though people have been doing it for years, right? Now it's more of a collective movement, right? But I think that for us as underground scholars, one of the things that, like, because we were at the University of California, which is a Research One institution, and it's an institution that produces knowledge about people like us, right? But it's being produced by people who are not us. For us, it was important that we claim our space as researchers, as academics, as scholars, as people who come with that experience, but also with the intellectual knowledge and the academic training to be able to do their studies, right? And I think that's groundbreaking in itself, because a lot of times we're just looked at as objects of studies, but not looked at as producers of knowledge.
Yeah.
And so for us, it was important that we claim that, and that we based our mission on that, right? That, look, man, we're here at the university, and we want to produce scholars that are going to produce the knowledge about who we are, who have that experience up close, but also have that academic, rigorous training to be able to do the study.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important, and that we have that training to do those studies, right? Because just, I think it would be a disservice to just tell anybody like, oh, you could do it, right? Without that training. Because then I think you could also do a lot of damage.
Yeah.
Right? Not just for the researcher, but also for the object, for those that you're studying, right? And so for us, it was important that we encourage our scholars to become knowledge producers, right? And we have done that.
It's coming now, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are producing knowledge about our experience, whether our experience in prison, our experience transitioning out of prison, our experience transitioning into higher education. So there's a lot of work that's being done by formerly incarcerated people, right? And I think something that we should do, we should create a database of research that has been produced by formerly incarcerated people.
Yeah, okay. All right, Danny. Well, thank you so much for your time. This is longer than I expected, but thank you. I'm sure everybody really appreciates you doing this interview.
No, for sure, man. Thank you for the time. Really appreciate it, Carlos.